Popcorn therapy. Holistic health and wellness through the lens of pop culture. Okay, so here we are back with Popcorn Therapy. If I haven't introduced myself in a while, I'm Julie. I am a therapist and a witch, which is going to come into what we're talking about today. I'm someone that's very interested in spirituality. I'm also a tarot reader, and I came to the work that I do through yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. And all of those themes, I think, are going to come up a little bit in our conversation today about Frozen 2, including the witchiness of what it is that I do, which some of you may relate to and some of you may think, what the heck is she talking about? So Frozen 2, okay, I loved Frozen, sure, but Frozen 2 to me is such a better film. There's so much more to it, and I think it has some really deep themes that I feel like we should be thinking about and talking about a little bit more, specifically the indigeneity of this film, the relationship that it has specifically with the Sami, I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that, people of Norway. So one thing that's kind of interesting to know about this movie is that the first Frozen used quite a bit of Sami imagery. Kristoff is wearing kind of a traditional Sami outfit when we first meet him. I'm not sure if he's supposed to be an indigenous person or if everyone is supposed to be. It's a little unclear, but a lot of this imagery and these ideas and this sort of reindeer connection, stuff like that, a lot of it was directly taken from Sami culture, but without really it being very deeply researched and without anyone consulting anyone Sami about it. And so it was, that sort of classic colonial, like, ooh, I like this, I'll just take it and use it for myself and not make any sort of credit to the person I'm taking it from. So in Frozen 2, they not only correct that, they actually use the indigenous relationship with these characters as, for me, the main part of the story. Like the most interesting aspect of Frozen 2 is really what I'm thinking of as a fantasy of reconciliation. So I live in Canada. I am speaking to you right now from Plains Cree Land in Treaty 6 territory, which is also known as Edmonton, Alberta. It's a big gathering place for a lot of Indigenous cultures. This was a big area for like fur trades and stuff like that. So a lot of different bands would hang out here. And I am a white person. My great-grandparents came from England and Ireland. And beyond that, there's a lot of English and British, and it sort of goes back into France and Germany. So, there's almost certainly some Celtic heritage there, but it's quite deeply buried in the ancestry. So, I'm sort of a classic white settler on Indigenous land. And in Canada, we are some people anyway, are talking about this, trying to figure out what it means to come into truth and reconciliation. A lot of it is about telling the true stories. So, in this context, I grew up learning very little about the Indigenous history of this land. I didn't learn the traditional names of the land that I was on. I didn't learn the colonial history aside from like, so-and-so arrived and took the land over and that was great. And like we called Canada because some, Indigenous people said Canada and it meant something else. It meant village, I think, or something else. And so we just called it Canada and that's the name of our country now. We used to have these heritage minutes. I don't know if you guys remember those. I'm certainly dating myself here. It was sort of an 80s, 90s thing, I think. But the heritage minutes would be these little commercials that you'd see in between your shows that you were watching. And it would be these little glorifications of the history of Canada. So sort of teaching you something about the history, but in a way that made you think that, everyone who lives here is so great and it's so wonderful that we took over this land. And there's really no mention of the people whose land we took over and what happened to those people. So this history is quite similar in the US. It's similar in a lot of other places as well. But essentially what happened was the settlers, mostly from England and a few other places, I guess, came in and wanted the resources, right? Wanted the furs, wanted the land, the space, all of that stuff. And at first were willing to kind of communicate with the indigenous people, learn from them, because they knew how to survive in this place. And, the English people were showing up in wools that would, make them kind of freeze in this sort of cold weather that we really have here. And the indigenous people had to sort of show them how to survive here. And instead of building this kind of long friendship and connection that, I don't know, there's a timeline maybe where that happened, it was definitely like, ooh, this is a great opportunity for us to take some power and take some land. And so one of the ways that they did that was the reservation system, sort of cordoning off indigenous people into these areas that the Canadian government promised would be a place where we'll take care of you, we'll take care of your housing, all of this stuff. But as it turns out, even to today, we're not going to fix any problems here. We're not going to give you clean water in these places. Like, we're going to take care of our people and just leave you kind of in these silos to deal with it yourself. You may or may not know that the South African apartheid system was based on what Canada did, inspired by the Canadian reservation system, okay? Residential schools, I'm not going to get too much into this, but you probably know a little of the history of this. Children were taken from their parents and quote unquote civilized into the Christian way. So children would be forced not to speak their languages, not to have any sort of ritual or connection to their traditional cultures, were sort of taught to be little Christian children, and in a way that it's come to be obvious that included a lot of abuse, physical, verbal, sexual, and so on. These little children were not treated as human beings. So it's a horrible history, and we're still coming to terms with it here in Canada and in the US as well. We're coming to terms with what that means, how to talk about it, how to work with it, and how to reconcile. Okay, so let's get back to Frozen 2, because that's what we're talking about. And the Sami history is similar. So we're in Norway now, and the Sami are the indigenous people in Norway. And its own history, I don't know as much about that area, but the themes are going to echo in the same way as they do in Canada. So quick recap of the story. Anna and Elsa are doing fine. Elsa's been running Arendelle for 3 years, since the first Frozen adventures, and she hears a voice calling her. And she follows the voice to this magical forest that is surrounded by mist. The story Anna and Elsa were told as children is that their grandfather, King Runard, was trying to get to know the Northuldrans who lived in this area, get to know the forest. I'm not sure it's explicit exactly what they thought he was doing there, but the war broke out. So the story they hear is that there was some danger in this magical forest and the Northuldrans attacked. And so that made the forest spirits angry, and the forest spirits surrounded the place with mist. So they go into this magical forest, not sure if it's going to be super dangerous or what it's going to be. And they find some Arendellian soldiers and some Northuldran people who have been there the whole time since the mist has sort of kept them trapped in this place. So the voice seems to want Elsa to know the truth, and she goes on these various adventures to find it out. It turns out the truth is, spoilers ahead, King Runard wanted to colonize. He wanted to, use the resources of the magical forest. And he put up a dam in this area ostensibly as a gift to the Northuldrans that actually protects Arendelle and sort of blocks off the abilities of the spirits to do what they want to do. So that's actually the reason why the spirits got mad and created the mist, was because of this dam, not because a fight broke out. As King Runard was doing this, he was the one who attacked the Northuldran leader who thought they were going to have tea and have a conversation. And he attacked him from behind, sort of unawares, like very dishonorable sort of attack. And then war did break out, and maybe that's part of what made the spirits mad, but it was the dam as well. Elsa and Anna also find out that their mother, Iduna, was a Northuldran. So they are both Northuldran and also Arendellian. Anna goes and takes down the dam with the help of the earth spirits, and Arendelle is saved, but it sort of corrects the issue with the forest spirits so that they can come into balance again. They take the mist down, happy ending for everybody. So in the context of this story, Anna is trying to reconcile the wrong that was done. She's trying to do, quote unquote, the next right thing and fix what happened. And so she takes down the dam knowing it's probably going to take down Arendelle as well. And with Elsa's help working with the spirits, they save Arendelle, so it's all fine. Some people criticize this ending because it wasn't enough of a sacrifice for that reconciliation, but that's sort of what the story is. That's what it's about. It's about her learning the truth and making it right. So this dam is real in Norway. There was a dam that was put up that the picture of the dam looks exactly like the dam in the movie. Like, it's definitely meant to reference this. And it flooded a Sami village. So it actually destroyed a Sami village and interrupted their, traditional hunting and fishing and things like that, because it was going to benefit in some way the colonizers that were there. So it's a very direct reference to something that happened in terms of the indigenous history in Norway. So in addition to that direct reference, there's also a moment when King Runard says something like, he visits the North Uldren village and he says, "Oh, these are very gentle people. They'll be very easy to take over." Evil laugh, ha ha ha. And in some of Columbus's first letters to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, when he was discovering, quote unquote, discovering these lands that indigenous people lived on already, he was in the Caribbean at this point. He wrote in the letter, I'll read it to you, that these people are destitute of arms, which are entirely unknown to them and for which they are not adapted, not on account of any bodily deformity, for they are well made, but because they are timid and full of terror. He goes on that the indigenous people here are fearful and timid, guileless and honest. And then he declares that the land could be easily conquered by Spain, and that these indigenous people might become Christians and inclined to love our king and queen and princes and all the people of Spain. So I think when King Runard says that, it's actually a direct reference to what Columbus said about some of the first indigenous people that he met and colonized. So I think this movie is very aware of the real histories of what's happened to the indigenous people that have been colonized in these various places in various ways. And so one thing that was really different about Frozen 2 to Frozen 1 is that they really got some consultation. They gathered together a pretty sizable group of Sami people who were willing to help consult on this movie, and they worked with them very closely to make sure that they were telling the story in a way that felt culturally sensitive and appropriate and, correct in all of those ways. And so I appreciate how thoughtful the filmmakers were this time around, not shying away from this sort of difficult aspect of history, but actually working with it and creating this interesting fantasy of reconciliation, which it's a Disney movie. It is a fantasy. It should be a fantasy. I think there is a place for aspirational stories, right? I think there's a place for us to be able to imagine what it could feel like to reconcile from something so horrible, because a lot of the time, I think what actually happens around these indigenous histories is essentially what happened to me. I'll just sort of share my perspective on it. So when I started learning about some of these really horrible things that had been done to the indigenous people in the land I live on, and there were these land acknowledgements that started coming out, the first one that I was hearing was, we're on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish people, which was the standard thing that you would say in Vancouver. And I was like, unceded? Like, what do you mean unceded? Because that implies it was stolen, right? Which it was. And I felt some discomfort around that, and I sat with it, it sort of took my time. And one thing that I think is really powerful for white people to do is sit with it, like sit with the discomfort. There's this fantastic book called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. It's more about Black history in America, but I think it really applies to all kinds of things. And as a person who's in a white body, we can feel very uncomfortable about these conversations because we feel like, I'm the privileged one, I'm the colonizer, I'm a bad person, so I don't have the right to think about this or talk about this, and I want to avoid it, right? Like, it's easier to avoid this stuff. Fair enough. That's something that we do. So when I was doing my counseling training and I was taking this really wonderful class called Indigenous Perspectives that was run by an elder, and there were other elders and different people that she brought in to just give us different perspectives on the Indigenous sort of way of looking at things. And on the first day, we did this exercise around looking at what it would have felt like to have your land stolen by people who were coming in. And we did the checkout afterwards, like, how's everybody feeling? And I was just like, I am soaked in shame. Like, I just feel so much shame at this point for what's happened, for what my ancestors did. You know, I feel like, what right do I have to even be sitting here learning this stuff? And this wonderful teacher, this elder whose name was Jean Wasajijig, I think is how to pronounce her name, she kind of gently corrected me. She was like, you know, shame isn't going to get you anywhere here. Shame is a feeling that shuts you down, right? Shame is a feeling that says, I'll do anything to get away from this. You know, she knows, like, you, Julie, sitting here today, didn't, you know, perpetrate these atrocities. You might benefit from the privileges that you gained from that. But, you know, there are some more complex ways of thinking about this than just, I'm a bad person because this is the color of my skin, right? And throughout the course of that class, I learned more and more about what it meant to be a white person, sort of exploring this Indigenous history. So one of the things I love about how Elsa and Anna find out that their mom is Northuldran and they're basically half Arundelian and half Northuldran, they contain both colonizer and colonized in their blood. And one of the things that my supervisor, Karen Goodfellow, who's also Indigenous, she often reminds me, we're all Indigenous to somewhere. Okay, so that doesn't mean that we have the same experience as someone who is Indigenous in Canada today, who's still dealing with the trauma of what's happened and the ways that oppression is still very present for these people. And we all hold those identities at the same time, okay? So when I look back at my history, and I deeply relate to the witch hunting era, okay? So, you know, that's a time that I've been learning a lot about. It keeps coming back for me as someone who, you know, I do identify as a witch in this lifetime. And you know, I can sort of go on and on about what that means to me. I don't necessarily follow a specific religion, but it's more so that I live intuitively with my spirit and my imagination and the magic of the external world and the land that I live on. And a lot of the witch history from the witch hunting times, you know, these quote unquote witches were people who had some sort of herbal awareness, right? They knew how to use herbs, often especially in terms of reproduction, fertility, abortion, things like that. The Christian authorities didn't like that. And sometimes they were sort of tapping back into older pagan religions that were colonized, destroyed, eradicated, swallowed up, you know, by Christianity. And we can actually still see this today because a lot of the celebrations of the witches' year, the sort of pagan celebrations of the seasons throughout the year, they show up in Christianity under different names. So Yule is an obvious one. The winter solstice celebration happens around the same time. It's called Christmas now, right? Imbolc is February 1st, and that was Bridget's Day. It's become Saint Bridget's Day, right? Like the goddess Bridget was sort of integrated into Christianity, be like, oh, she's ours. Like we'll just turn her into something so that the pagans can come with us and be Christian, but not lose this piece that they are so attached to, right? And so, you know, I was raised in a Christian house, in a Christian church, like not super religious, definitely not as intense as it can be for some people. But I was raised on that mythology. I was raised on that rhythm of going to church every Sunday. And, you know, the Christian religion is very, God is up there, out there, somewhere else, not on the land, not down here, you know, not in the herbs, not in the magic of the water, which are indigenous concepts, right? So to come back to Frozen 2, it's interesting to me that the movie makes clear at a certain point that the Northuldrans are not magical people, but they work with the magic of the forest. Some people have interpreted this as the, you know, magical native kind of trope of like when there's an indigenous character, they're like mysterious and magical and so on. But I think actually the movie tries not to do that explicitly. They say, no, the Northuldrans are not magical, but they work in collaboration with the water spirits and the fire spirits and the air spirits and so on. And I feel like there is a way of kind of looking at indigenous ways of knowing, which is about paying attention, right? It's not about necessarily magic, but it's about, you know, here's a plant that, you know, the white people are calling a weed that we can use as a salve or as a medicine. You know, here's how to use water in this specific way to like irrigate the crops and whatever without these machines. Like there's a lot of indigenous ways of knowing that have to do with really looking at the relationships between things. And the colonial way is very much one perspective is imposed on everyone else, right? So it has to be this way. We do it this way. We don't listen, right? We talk, but we don't listen, which I guess is kind of what I'm doing now. So comment, like get back to me. Let's let this be a conversation. But again, I think, holding that reality that there's Indigenous and colonizer within, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us hold both of those identities at the same time. So, I heard this meme a little while ago that really stuck with me. I'm still sitting with it. Obviously, it was like months ago. But this woman says, like, you're not the daughter of the witches that didn't get burned. You're the daughter of the people that burned those witches. And what bugged me about that post or whatever it was is, no, we're both. We're both. Like we come from this ancestry where there would have been people who were oppressed and there would have been people who were oppressing. We have to be aware that we are both colonizer and colonized. So when I say, I have this history of, pagan religion and Celtic religion in my ancestry somewhere back there, that's not to negate all the colonizers that came after that and all of the people, including me, who have really benefited from being in this position of privilege. And, I also heard a while ago this quote that I thought was amazing, which is just this concept that white people have had to sacrifice their spirituality in order to have the privilege of being white, and also sacrifice their culture and their traditions and all of these things. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because white is, of course, a concept, right? It's not really a real thing. Like there's no there, but it's something that's material and real in the sense that it's used and it's sort of agreed upon in a lot of ways in our cultures. So I'm not saying that whiteness doesn't exist. It's people who believe themselves to be white, as Ta-Nehisi Coates repeatedly says in his book Between the World and Me, which is about being Black in America. It's people who believe themselves to be white. It's a theory, a concept. It's something that white people want to believe to be real, some of them, and is real. It's material, and also it comes from a place of conforming to patriarchal white supremacist and Christian beliefs. I think like Christianity has done a really good job colonizing, spiritually colonizing, right? Taking things over. And so when I think about my identity in that way, it's more interesting to me to hold the multifacets of that and, not to deny the parts of me that are colonizer, but also to think about like, okay, if that's my ancestry and my history, then what am I going to do about it, right? How am I going to work with this? How am I going to think about this? And one simple way that Resmaa Menakem talks about in his book is to sit with it, be uncomfortable, let yourself feel the discomfort of like, ooh, what does that mean to me? And like, what does it feel like to think about my whiteness as maybe invented, or to think about my colonizer identity and the atrocities that have come with that? So, I just think it's really sort of beautiful that Anna and Elsa hold both. I know that it was partly to make them more appealing, to sort of ease the racial tension, right? Because if they're both, then it makes sense that Elsa can be a bridge between these people, between spirit and humans, and so on. And that would be a little harder to buy, I think, if she was purely colonizer. And so I sort of appreciate that there's a little bit of like, this makes the storytelling easier from our perspective, like a little bit of lip service there. But also I think there is this deeper meaning of holding what it means, or what it can mean to hold both identities at the same time, not necessarily in that literal way of, my mom is this, my dad is that, but in the way that I'm talking about here, where like my whiteness also holds oppression from much, much longer ago than the oppression that's still happening today, which matters and also isn't the same. And so I also need to be aware of how that identity benefits me and what I can do with it. So part of what I want to do with it is talk about it as a white person who has worked through some discomforts about this. And, I do really want to encourage you, if you're listening and you're a white person as well, if you associate with that colonizer identity and maybe some of this conversation is making you feel uncomfortable, I don't know, sit with it, think about it, like try not to just sort of pass it off to the next thing. And maybe we don't know what to do about it, right? But I think even just bringing that awareness in is really powerful. And so here we've got this Disney movie, it's like for children, and it's telling this story that is so complex and so deep and so powerful. I think it really matters a lot. And it's something that, maybe I'll be able to talk to my son about these things in a different way, than I would have been able to as a child who just didn't learn this stuff. Like, this just wasn't the kind of story I would have gotten, when I was a kid. Like, we had The Indian in the Cupboard was like a children's story around that time. Like, it was Peter Pan. I tried to rewatch that with my son, speaking of Disney movies, and it is so racist. I turned it off. I was just like, no, we're not going to do this. Like, the stereotypes of Indigenous people in that movie is atrocious. And so we're in a different generation, right? There's a different way of being here. And if our stories change, our culture can change, right? And I think that's really powerful. So loved Frozen 2, loved the music, cried so many times watching this movie, multiple times. There are also other themes that I think are really grown up, actually, for a kid's movie around like change and aging and things not lasting forever. So, I will watch this movie as many times as my 3-year-old wants to, which might not be that many times, but I want to watch it more times because I thought it was really beautiful. So tell me what you think about this movie. Tell me what you think about these themes coming up. I would love to know your thoughts. Again, relationship and conversation is the decolonizing aspect, right? That's the work that we can do, is sort of expanding our point of view from I'm right and you're wrong to what do you think? Let's talk about this. What are your thoughts and feelings? So please feel free to comment, get in touch, share your thoughts, and let me know what you think. As always, if you want to get in touch with me, you can follow me at Popcorn Therapy on TikTok, at Julie Peters Wellness on Instagram. You can book appointments with me. I do tarot readings and counseling via the Wellness Clinic here in Edmonton. I can do those online from anywhere as well, whatever land you happen to be on. Okay, so thanks for listening. And don't forget to follow and share this podcast if you enjoyed it.
Soundstripe.